Hi, friends. So I haven't done one of these in a while where I sort of show myself to you. Here I am. I posted an Instagram picture this morning of a reading I had done for myself, and I thought, oh, it might be fun to do a video about this very topic. And the topic was, well, it was what I had said on Instagram was that a reading is basically a mini myth that we tell ourselves and that we use the myth to make sense of our life. Um, I've been having a lot of conversations with my writer friends recently about myth and about the very human need we have for those mythologies, and how in a weird way I feel like maybe our modern life is a little bit lesser in some ways because we don't quite have modern myths to go along with them. Like at one time in human history, like science and myth were the same thing. And that's not, science is different and myth is fiction. So it's just a really interesting. Sorry, I'm just gonna get some stuff out of my pocket so that I don't forget that it's there. I just noticed it was there. So we don't really have modern myths in the same way. I think actually that's probably one reason why a show like Game of Thrones is so popular, because it is sort of a mythology. But myths really are the stories that we tell throughout humanity to make sense of the world. And that's really what a tarot reading is too. Sometimes I get really caught up in um, trying to be brilliant and say the right thing and to rely so much on systems. And a friend of mine the other day and I were chatting. So, you know, all of this conversation about myth, etc. I've also been going through a moment the last few weeks where I've just been in a really sort of like imposter syndrome place. I don't want to like make this a confessional, but we all have times where we're not at our most mentally healthy, and the last few weeks have been rough. I mean, since 2016, things have been hard to get through, generally. But it's been a moment of like not feeling super great. I think part of that also, so I'm going to the reader's studio in a few weeks, and I just remember last year sitting down at the table for the first day and thinking like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like all of these people know what they're doing, and I'm just some asshole who's like a poser. And whatever. I'm not telling you that story to fish for compliments. I'm just sharing with you that happens in my brain. Not that you were gonna compliment me. Whatever. I'm just saying like that's what's going on in my head as I sit there, and so I'm like approaching going there again. And I mean, the rest of the week was fine, or the weekend was fine, but my first reading there, when I sat down, wasn't my favorite work I've ever done. And I'm sort of approaching going there again and feeling very sort of imposter syndrome moment. And anyway, I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and she said to me, you just gotta like say what you see sometimes. You just gotta say what the cards are doing. And I'm like, you know what, that's so fucking true. Like that's really what a reading is. And so like I had that in my head, and then I've been reading these books by Joseph Campbell about myth, and mostly for my theater life, because I really want to make some stuff. I really want to make some theater that's about modern myth, and that touches that very sort of core human need that we have in us for story and to make sense of the chaos. But like those two things sort of converging this morning in my mind made me think about how that's really what we do with the tarot reading is we tell a story with the cards, and then we use that story to make sense of life. So we create a little myth, and then we make that myth make sense. Um, in the book I'm working on, which is going very slowly, far slower than I anticipated it. It's funny. It's like an easier book to write than Tarot on Earth is, and that was like an electric sort of like output. It was very a magician moment of like getting that book. And I worked and worked and worked and worked like crazy. And this one's like an easier book to write because it's really just a collection of essays on different tarot related topics. And I'm like, do 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 do. That's neither here nor there. I do have a chapter about what I'm going to talk about, but when we're reading for ourselves, or when we get stuck, or when we're not feeling it, I think when we get in our head, we have to start with the mythology. What's the myth of the reading? What is the story? What's the narrative of the cards? And then from there, we make that speak to the question we're asking, or to whatever's going on in our life. You know, if you watch me at all, if you read Tarot on Earth, I'm very, 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 very big on asking questions and really like working and whittling down the question so that it's something that, and you know, that I know what I'm asking, and that what I'm asking is what I really want to know, because reading that way is easier than just sort of pulling some cards and guessing what they mean. But even without a question, I think you can still do this. You create the story, and then you find the resonance of that story in your life. And I thought I would do just two examples with you today, and just sort of share what I mean. And I think you can do this with sort of Rider-Waite-Smith cards, and I think you can do it with pippier cards. So I'll do both. I'll try to go quickly. So for the first one, I'm going to use the beautiful Robert M. Place Alchemical Tarot, which one of my favorite human beings on the planet gave me recently. I was a big surprise. And I thought, I when I looked at the two decks, the Tower of the Sevenfold Mystery and this one, I thought I would prefer the Tower of the Sevenfold Mystery, but I actually really like this one. Artistically, there's something very, I don't know, satisfying about it. So here's what I'm gonna do. All right, I'm gonna sort of challenge my improv skills with you. This is not. I mean, this is one thing that always gets my anxiety going when I'm doing a reading. Like, one of the reasons why I read primarily for people on video is because I have the time to sit and like wrestle with the reading. You know, to wrestle with those angels. I always feel intimidated to do it in real time, but I'm gonna do that. And not that this is live, but I guess I could edit it. So I'm gonna do a general reading, which is not my favorite, but just to demonstrate that you can do this and find resonance in your life. And then I'll do, depending on how long this takes, I'll do another one with a Marseille style deck that's about a question. All right, so this is just a general reading, no particular question. Inspired by Robert M. Place, I tend to read sets of three, which I've talked about before many times. So like when I do a spread, it'll usually be like a 9-card spread, and I read in combos of 3 or just 3 cards. If you follow me on Instagram, when I do like receive and release, that's 2 sets of 3. That does come right from Robert M. Place, and I just think it's I think 3 is like a perfect number to start with to do what we're about to do. It's like, you could do this with 1 card, but I think it's just the combination of cards gives us context. So the cards limit the potential meanings for each other by being with each other. So you pull 1 card and you're like, oh, you know, temperance, oh, you know, temperate, just be more balanced. Like, but then you pull 2 more and that gives more context. So it's like, be more balanced about the 6 of Cups. So be more balanced in your backward thinking, you know, your nostalgia, you know, remember things for the good and the bad, for, you know, so it gives us more context. So I think 3 is like, if you're going to do this, I think 3 is a really good way to go. So this is a little bit easier to do if I were to turn the camera down, but I'm not gonna do that. All right. So we'll go ahead and cut, and I'll pull 3 cards. 1 is the Queen of Coins. 2 is the 2 of Cups. And the 2 of Cups was actually in my reading this morning too, and then the Sun. All right, so I've got this combo. Can I get this like in a... doing this backwards is so tough. I feel like so dumb. Oh, here we go. She goes first, and then the Two of Cups, and then the Sun. This is so hard. All right, let me do this way. Here we go. All right, it's going to be backwards to you, but you'll get the point. Why am I so bad at this? So I just start telling the story. What I may do here is maybe take a picture of this and insert it into the video. That may make more sense. So I have a character. So I have a main character who's the Queen of Coins. All right. So then I start to tell the story. So what do I see? I see a woman with a horn of plenty, with a cornucopia. Very comfortable in her environment, enough to be completely unclothed. So she's safe. She's wearing a crown. She's got some money. So she's super comfortable. She's got everything she needs. And what I know about the queens is that they are very secure. Queens to me are like our art directors, our like editor, like someone who works with other people to help them get their work out there. So like an agent, an art director, an editor, something like that. All right, so I have someone who really is very comfortable, very like in their environment, has what they need, is like safe enough to go around completely unclothed. It's got a house in the distance. So here's my main character. And then I've got the Two of Cups. All right, so I probably will put a picture in here. So here's an interesting thing. I've got now these two people in a bottle. So like this, the Two of Cups traditionally like usually positive card, like romance, love, you know what I mean, all those relationshipy things. But here, these people are like encased in glass. So there's two people that are like in this sort of rarefied environment. It doesn't seem like they're super unhappy to be there. In fact, they're sort of enjoying it. And then there's this rose on top. And so, there's like two people, but there's like a lack of oxygen too. You know what I mean? So there's something in here of like, are they protected or are they, trapped? Have they gone in here? Are they in a bubble? Or are they stuck somewhere? Have they put themselves there? The flower makes me think of like photosynthesis and all the things. So it feels like there is oxygen in this tank that comes from this sort of really unique experience. I know I'm gonna get shit about my umming. Like, fuck off with the comments about my umming. Like, I get it. Okay, I'm annoying. There I did it again. I don't really care. If it annoys you, it annoys you. Life's tough. Sorry about it. There's oxygen in here. Like, the flower is generating air. It's alive. It's not dead. So probably this is like, I'm getting the sense that there's like a positive experience here. And then there's the sun. And we also have two people here. And they're out in this environment of the sun. And this is an unusual image for the sun card. Usually we have like a child. Robert M. Place's alchemical deck has a lot of symbology, symbolism, etc. So it's a really unique deck that has a lot of specific symbolism. But there's definitely a connection between these two, because it looks like almost the same. God, this is so hard. Same people, in a way, although they've switched places. And they're out in the air. They're out in the air here. All right, so what's my story? What's my narrative, right? So there's no right or wrong answer here. And, like, just to talk through this experience, this is where I start to get anxious as a reader, right? This is where my self-confidence starts to wane. And I start to think, like, oh, fuck, I don't know how to do this. Like, I'm just so bad. Oh, my God, I'm going to give it up. No, what do I know? I know that there's a person... If nothing else, you're gonna have like blooper reel. You have a person who has a lot of stuff, really abundant, really safe, and then there's these people. So how do these two connect? This is the thing I now need to figure out as a storyteller, right? Now, is my Queen of Coins one of these two people, or is she looking at this? How do these things relate? Um, and it like here's the thing, and this is where like the pressure comes in. Like it doesn't really matter. That's not the point. The point is like what is the story we're coming up with, because it will have currency for you somehow. It's like it's not a test. All right, so I'm gonna look at these cards. I'm not gonna hold them up for you right now. You've seen them. I'll try to put a picture in if I don't forget. And so I just need to like sit with the combo here so I can see them all together. All right. So the Queen of Coins is actually looking at the cornucopias. So she's really focusing on what she has. Um, I would say that this is a person who, by and large, and now I'm going to actually do something I haven't done yet, which is look at the meanings of the cards traditionally. So the Queen of Coins, Pentacles, Earth, responsibility, life, sort of day to day. So we have someone who really has everything they need. Like things are actually okay. They're a good mentor and creator. They are a nurturer, and they are nurtured. And I think that this story, is about someone who has a lot of good stuff going on, and actually has relationships that are protected and that keep them safe. So this is like a really lovely combination. And also the transition from the Two of Cups to the Sun also suggests like a certain amount of safety and loveliness, and warmth, and heat even. So I think that this reading would be like a really gentle reminder. So the story, let me tell the story, God. Like my brain, this is the hard part about living in my head, is that I'm going in 100 directions all the time. That's why the umming happens, if you really need justification for it, because I'm trying to control the monkey up here. Someone who has what they need, like they have enough food, they have enough money, they're in good shape, has relationships and friendships in their life that make them feel safe and that make them feel warm. Now, that flat out is like a really easy narrative, not super hard. I think that now the myth, that's the story, that's the myth. Like someone has this good stuff in their life. How does that connect? Well, I mean, for me, it's certainly a helpful reminder when you have monkey brain like I do, where you're constantly worried and you're constantly anxious and you're constantly terrified of what if this happens, what if that happens. So I think the card is a reminder of like there are people who love you. You have the things you need. It's okay. Yes, life is shitty. Everything is impermanent, right? Monkey brain in Buddhism. So impermanence, but like you've got love, to quote Pearlie. You've got people who are there for you and who make you feel safe, who make you feel warm. You've got the things you need. It's okay. So that's how the myth connects to life. Certainly connects to my life right now. So that's like one example, right? So we do the thing, we tell the story, we talk about the cards, and like, well, how does that story connect to my life? And then the next example I'm going to do, we'll do it with an actual question. But so again, just to sum up, the story is like there's a person who is a nurturer and is a giver and a carer, and someone who really tries to take care of people in their life. That's the Queen of Coins. Has relationships that keep them safe and warm, and so that's the mythology of this story. And then the way it connects to is like, calm down, motherfucker. Things are okay sometimes. All right. I really like the Robert and Place decks. I really like the color. This is just a really interesting deck. Like alchemy and these things are so interesting, and I've read his books. I just don't retain information that way because it intimidates the fuck out of me. But it really is a beautiful deck, and I think like those things can enhance your experience as a reader. Like those little clues, those can help your narrative. I don't know all the symbols on the cards that well, but I don't know. I mean, if you've got the sign for Jupiter, what Jupiter means, like that can add. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. All right, so I'm going to do another one with a picture, because you can do this without pictures on the cards too. So I'm going to show you that technique, which is the one that I used this morning on Instagram. So we'll do a question on this. We'll say like, what'll we say? I'll do a real reading for myself, and that way you can watch me sweat. so so things have been frustrating at work. So how can I manage my stress this week when things may start to get a little out of hand? How do I manage my emotions at work within the context of an environment I can't fully control? All right, let's see how that plays out for you. So this is the Jean Noblet Marseille deck, which I just pulled out this morning. This is one of my favorites. I love Marseille decks. I've talked about this before, but I remember when I started reading, I thought they were the ugliest thing, and they're not. I really find them beautiful. I know the color palette, and there's some really beautiful, like, colorful Marseille decks for sure, but there's something lovely about simplicity, and you don't need a picture to tell a story. You can, these are, it's a prompt. You're creating the mythology in order to figure everything else out, but you don't need pictures to do it. So in this case, we could get, the reading I did this morning had 3 pip cards. I think I have reversals in this deck. I do occasionally use reversals with Marseille decks because without the picture, sometimes I do like to have a little more shading of whether something is acting in a positive or negative way. I find that the cards in context will show me that color too, but sometimes it does help. I don't always do it. I think the key thing is that before you go in whether or not you're going to use them. I think, I talked about this before, but set the rule for the reading and then do the reading. All right, so how do I manage my emotions at work, my stress level, when things may get out of hand or out of my control? All right, so we've got the 7 of Swords. The Ace of Swords, and the King of Cups. All right, so we do have a person in this reading. It's always interesting when you have a character, and that's so. If I'm doing a reading like this, and I've got a person in a deck that doesn't have a lot of people in it, I will sort of look at the king. I will look at the person as the querent, if there's only one, or as the main player in the myth that we're about to tell. So we're about to create the mythology of this reading, and I know that it's about this guy. All right, I also know that this guy, I do have some visual clues here. There's a lot of books, Camelia Elias, Yoav Ben-Dav, Enrique Enriquez, all talk about the visual language of the car. Actually, I talk a little bit about the visual language of pip decks in Tarot on Earth too, but they do it better because they're geniuses. But I do have visual clues. I've got this guy looking away, and the other thing that I can say is I have weapons, and he's looking away from the weapons. So right out of the gate, I have a King of Cups. King of Cups. So he's emotionally intelligent. We know that. Mature. On his game, like kings are like OGs of maturity, right? When they're in light, and looking away from the weapons. So I have a king who's emotionally intelligent, smart, been around the block, knows his shit, thoughtful, human, empathetic, and he's looking away from the swords. He's looking away from the weapons. So he is not going to engage in battle as conflict arises. That's not how he fights. That's not how he plays this game. So that's an interesting thing for me, right? And for all of us. So we have a king. We have the fairy tale of a king. Once upon a time, there was a king who was really emotionally intelligent, smart, dope, knows his shit, and is not going to bust out the swords. All right. So that's the first thing I know. Now, if I didn't have a person, what I would do is what I'm going to do next, which is look at the numerological connection between the pips and their elements. So I have 2 swords, so we know we're dealing with what's going on up here. We also know we're dealing with communication. And I'm asking about my job where I talk all day to people and try to explain things. So communication is a big part of my life. So I've got the 7 of Swords, rather, which was my first card. Sevens are sort of a return to the self, like a checking in with ourselves. Sevens are also lucky, so there's something nice about sevens. Sevens break up balance, so they like odd numbers tend to be really disruptive. Even numbers tend to be balanced. And one of the reasons why seven for me means to check in with yourself is because you're breaking the stasis for a minute and you're saying, okay, like six is everything's beautiful. Seven is like, okay, but is it? Let me just recheck in with myself. So there's a return to the self, an exploration. It's a very intellectual number. So the Seven of Swords is like a double intellect for me, because it's like going within and checking and thinking about thinking. Swords, of course, the mind, communication, etc. So I've got that as an element in my story. So it's like going within and thinking and checking in with like what's important, what do I value, what do I know. And then I've got the Ace of Swords, which is a return to the beginning. I've got the seed. Swords or aces rather are seeds, or the beginning of something. It's also like a return to one, if you think about that. Like it's a reset. It can be the start of something, but it can be a reset. And it's not the first card in my spread, it's the second one. So I go from 7 to 1, not from 1 to 7. So when I check in, the check-in of the 7 and the evaluation of the self and thinking and thought process then allows for a reset to 1. So that's part of my story. The other part of my story, again, is that these are elements of the king. So I talked like visually about the king looking away from those things, and that'll become part of the mythology in a minute. But so I have the fairy tale is about an emotionally stable, smart, thoughtful, badass King of Cups who checks in with himself, sets the mind, thinks about what's important, evaluates the stuff that's going on in here, mostly up here, right? And then returns to 1. So once upon a time, there was a king who was intelligent, emotionally aware, thoughtful, blah, 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 blah. Goes inside, checks in with himself, thinks about what he's thinking about, and then resets to 1. And this king, when engaging in conflict, does not use weapons, does not use physical weapons. He uses emotional intelligence. He looks behind, he leaves the weapon behind. All right. So that's the myth. That's the fairy tale. Now, how does that relate to my question, which was, how do I manage my emotions and my stress when things are out of my control? Well, again, it's not hard to draw a line between the story I just told and the question I asked. Like right out of the whole fairy tale tells me everything I need to do. I need to be emotionally intelligent. I need to be aware. I need to not engage in battle when it's not necessary. Swords are not going to be the way you win the fight. You have to evaluate what you're thinking, return to the inside, think about what's going on, what's really important, like what's really worth fighting for, and then return to 1 and reset the mind. So that's the answer to my question. Ben, you got to do this shit. You got to be emotionally intelligent. You got to be the King of Cups. You've got to constantly evaluate your mental state and the effect that that's having on what you're communicating, communicate what's important, and then reset when you need to. So again, it's just as simple as that. It's like, here's the story that I'm telling. Here's how that myth relates to my life. Here's how that myth helps me make sense of the cosmos, which is the same thing that Persephone tells, like just to sort of underline the point. The myth of Persephone in the underworld is saying, well, here's why we have winter and spring and summer. You know what I mean? Persephone goes to the underworld in the winter. She takes summer with her. She comes back in the summer and we get summer. That's how, ancient peoples made sense of the seasons. This myth is how I make sense of the question I asked, which is how do I manage my emotional state as we go through sometimes rocky times at work. All right. So that's really all there is to it. It's just tell me the story. It's like being a kid with a picture book. Once upon a time there was a dragon who smoked cigars, but he was a king. and then there was a green lion and a princess, and then an old man. And how do all these things fit together? You know what I mean? Like that's I'm oversimplifying it, but it's like you look at the images if you're working with a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck, and then you think about what the interplay is between them. So the dragon is looking at the princess and the green lion, but he also looks like he's kind of on guard. So they're approaching him, and he's like, oh no, like I've got my cigar here, I've got my fire, I've got my torch. Like I don't super need you up in my grill, but they're like, look, we're bringing you the sun and the moon. Like, we're giving you a gift. We've got all this shit for you. And he's like, I don't know. And then the hermit is looking away from all that. He's like, I don't want to look. I don't want to look at what's going to happen here. So he's looking in a different direction, and he's like, I'm out. So then, like, I get that little story. So I have this fairy tale now. And then I think about the meanings of the cards. So I've got the King of Staffs, so the King of Wands. So, I know he's like a fiery personality, but also mature, also been through some shit, also knows his business. I've got strength, and I know that that's about empowerment and like the ability to make things happen without pushing. And then I've got the wisdom of the hermit. And so I just sort of like weave that into a story. And then I say, what is that story telling me about my life? Or whatever question it was I asked. And that's a reading. And that's really all there is to it. Now, sometimes it's hard to draw the line. Like that story I just told you is like, what the fuck does that mean? You know what I mean? But that's why context helps. Like if there was a question involved, and the question was like, what do I need to do to make my relationship with my landlord better? Then immediately I'm like, okay, the landlord is the dragon, and he's like, no, this is mine. Like, don't come in. I'm like, hey, like, I've got all this stuff to share with you, and the hermit's like, no, look away. And so then I get this story, and I'm like, okay, my landlord is like super introverted. Like, he seems like he's a fun guy because he's the king of fire. He's the king of wands, but like, he doesn't want that. Like, he's private. And so my like trying to like get up in his life, and my strength, my push to get into his business is like making him super uncomfortable. Like the hermit is the advice. So like I need to sort of just go and let him be. I need to do the wise thing and go and let him be. Now I just made that up, but like the story sometimes is like you panic and you're like, fuck, that doesn't make sense. But then if you sit with it and you live with it, it does. It will. You can start drawing the lines. The key is to not panic, which is like my default position. Like I panic left, right, and center, all the time, always. So that's tough. But isn't that a lot? But hopefully this is interesting, and hopefully it makes sense. Because no matter what system you're using, you can always rely on this story. Create a story, create a narrative. Even if you're not a storyteller, that's fine. Like we don't all do Once Upon a Time. You can pull 3 bullet points. If we think about the 7 of Swords, the Ace of Swords, and the King of Cups, it's like bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Bullet point 1 is go inside and think. Bullet point 2 is the seed of thought. Bullet point 3 is emotional maturity and power. And so then I'm like, dun dun dun. I still can get to the same answer, even if I don't have the flowery story about the king who doesn't use weapons. That adds another layer, but maybe you don't think that way, and that's fine. We all have a narrative style because we all tell stories all the time. And I won't go into all of that because I don't want to spoil some of the fun things I have in the chapter in my book if I ever finish it on similar stuff. But it's cool. So that's that. I hope this was fun. I hope this was interesting. And as always, take care of yourselves and have a good week.